Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to just thank a few people in particular. I'd like to thank Tom Elliott for originally agreeing to do the research, and then Mike Nesbitt for following up and allowing us to actually have access to the party. And I'd also like to thank the British Academy as well for sponsoring most of the research that we've conducted on this project, and the anonymous referees that supported it. I would like to thank the original referee who blocked it the first time, but we know who you are, although you may not know that we know who you are. At the same time, I also want to say that my colleagues have been fantastic to work with. This is the second time I've worked with my colleagues on a project of this sort. John Tong, Jim McCauley, Sophie and Moira. And I hope we get the opportunity to work together on other projects as well. So just very briefly, I'll just quickly say that this we'll be opening this up to questions and answers from the panel who've kindly come to give their views and comments on the Ulster Unionist Party and the book, and also will be available as well to answer any questions as well. So I just want to say that the book itself is the first time and first ever membership survey of the Ulster Unionist Party, and what we were trying to do is basically look at who they are, who are the members of the Ulster Unionist Party, what they believe, and we did this by interviewing individual members of the party, holding focus groups, and also in interviewing the leaders of the party, from Tom Elliott, Mike Nesbitt, Maud Trimble, Lord MP, and Robin Swan. And we were trying to understand what had happened to the party, particularly after the lead up and the trauma that occurred with the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, and the debate that went on inside the party as well. So the book covers all of that in terms of the historical aspect of it, and the aftermath of the origins of the strategy for negotiating the Good Friday Agreement, and then the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement and the tensions that happened in the party. And the book also covers a number of different areas of how the members have viewed various aspects, both political and social, in Northern Ireland, from policing, the constitutional future of Northern Ireland, controversial issues like the Irish language, and a breakdown of what the party membership consists of, whether that's in terms of class, religious, denominational composition, attitudes to other parties, and things like national identity as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Sophie.
Thank you. So we're now going to start tonight's roundtable. First of all, I just want to say thank you all for coming. Firstly, we were worried that we'd made a mistake by having a book launch at the end of January, but it's so nice to see so many faces here, so thank you. And I also have the pleasure of chairing this event, and thank you to our three guests as well for being here this evening. So just to give a quick introduction, firstly we have Mike Nesbitt, and Mike's given me permission to say, in terms of his latest CV, there's lots of bullet points, and they all start with used to be. And I'll leave him to expand on that in a moment. We also have Lauren Kerr, who's UUP Press and Policy Officer. And finally, we'll have Alex Payne speaking, political writer, columnist and commentator, and former Director of Communications for UUP. So we're going to have about 5 minutes each. So after 5 minutes, I'll give you a little bit of a wave, and then we'll open to Q&A. So, Mike?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And can I begin by thanking the authors? Particular thanks to Professor John Tong, who invited me. I got a wonderful email from him, timed at 12:58 today. Starts, "Dear Mark," it's just a typo. We've got Alex, we've got Lauren, but we really want a former leader to input to this debate. I know you're busy, and I'm sure you're asked this all the time, but could you find out if Reg MP's in town? When you're leading an organisation like the Ulster Unionist Party, you are making decisions constantly, endlessly. And I suppose the two categories of decision that you make are, do I want to make a decision that represents what the party thinks, if there is such a thing as a settled view within a party as big as the Ulster Unionist Party? Or do I want to lead the party, or significant parts of it, to a different place that you consider to be a better position. And that's what attracted me to the proposition and the offer from the authors. It was having the database so that you knew more certainly than ever before which of the options you were going to choose. Which option were you actually reflecting what the party thinks, or were you making a decision that you really wanted to push the boat out, as it were, and try and take the party to a slightly different position? And as I'm sure you know, I kind of favoured pushing the boat out from time to time. If there was a downside or a cost to the data, it was recognising that the authors would wrap a narrative around it. And I was pleased to see that the title they chose was Country Over Party. Not so happy to put a question mark at the end of it, but I understand why you would do that as academics. But I also note the very last words on the very last page of narrative on page 223 are referring to the Belfast Agreement, so a case of country before party, period, not question mark. And that's what I think the Ulster Unionist Party has done. My narrative, very simply, I came into the party in 2010, got elected in 2011, and within 10 months of that, I was party leader, a ridiculously short timescale, and yet long enough to realise that this great party that I admired, once you looked kind of under the bonnet, as it were, you were looking at a party that lacked cohesion and coherence, particularly at an elected level. It seemed to be there were too many people who said whatever they felt, irrespective of party policy. They were sole traders who, to my mind, were using the Ulster Unionist brand as a flag of convenience to get elected, and then they did their own thing. So my theme was coherence and cohesion. And I accept that if you play as a team, that doesn't necessarily mean you get a vote from the electorate. But if you don't play as a team, you certainly do not get their votes. And if we achieved anything over my 5 years, I think it was to react more as a team. And I believe that was reflected electorally. We held our European seat easily in 2014. We got 88 council seats, which is up to 10 more than any commentator thought we would. And then in 2015, of course, we had the general election when nobody thought we were getting back into Westminster onto the green benches. And we got 2 seats. And what I did was the ultimate mixed message, which I would be interested in your comments on. Because I looked at the 18 constituencies and I said there are only 3 we could win. We can win South Antrim if it's Danny Kinahan. He can unseat Willie McRae of the DUP. We've got a chance in Upper Bann if it's Joanne Dobson. She might be able to unseat David Simpson. So there's 2 battlegrounds where we're going head to head, toe to toe with the DUP. But the third one was Fermanagh South Tyrone. Tom Elliott was the only person who could win it, in my view, the only man on planet Earth. But we needed the DUP. So we're going to fight them here, we're going to fight them there, and we're going to come together here. And we came together to the point where Lord Morrow, the DUP party chairman, and Arlene Foster were knocking doors, handing out Ulster Unionist leaflets, asking people to vote for Tom Elliott. And he won the seat. So I know a lot of this book is about mixed messages and confusion, but you know what? The electorate's not slow, and sometimes it works out. The one area where we couldn't replicate electorally that success, of course, was the Assembly. And I take full responsibility for that, but my analysis is this. What happened at St Andrews, where they changed how we elect the First Minister, made it impossible for the Ulster Unionist Party, because the DUP knocked doors and say if you vote for them, you get Marty McGuinness, or now Michelle O'Neill, as First Minister. And that's a corruption, to my mind, of what was voted for by over 70% of the population 21 years ago.
Thank you, and apologies, I am a press officer, so I will largely be referring to a pre-prepared statement throughout this.
You better be.
I think, firstly, just to comment on the book, I think it is brave for any political party to undergo such a public exercise of self-reflection, and particularly with the Ulster Unionist Party, where over the years there's been a lot of intrigue about our party membership and what makes them tick. I think in some parts we may reflect it makes for uncomfortable reading, but as Mike has said, I think that it's good to know what you're working with. I think that, I mean, of course, there are challenges for the UP. We can't ignore the fact that for nearly 2 decades we haven't been the primary choice for many unionists. And we do have a unique challenge in that we have a very large membership, which spans from people who remember when we were unchallenged as the party of government, right through to people who no longer remember us ever being in power and who were born after the Good Friday Agreement. I think that the fact remains, no matter what, that Northern Ireland needs a progressive, modern, inclusive unionist party. So I think that we should take heart and be optimistic in the fact that there is still a gap in the market for the kind of politics that we can provide. But I suppose it's what we do about it and how we grasp that opportunity. I think over the last number of years we have proven that we can do a difference in style from a rival. But I think now there's a challenge for us in demonstrating that we can also be different in our substance. As Mike has reflected there, I mean, the last few years there has been some extraordinary moments for the Ulster Unionist Party. Electorally, when we did go back to Westminster after 10 years of not being there against seemingly all the odds. But also politically, when for the first time in our history we left government and we formed the first opposition in the party of in the history of Northern Ireland. So I think that actually going forward, that's the sort of move that can really capture the imagination of the next generation. Because I think now for the party we do have to start looking forward to who is coming after us. In this electoral cycle there is an increasing number of people voting who were born after the Good Friday Agreement, and we have to realise that there are a large number of people sort of 18 to 24 who are staunchly pro-union but are increasingly not casting their vote for parties which designate as unionist parties. And sorry, this is probably the first time in my life that people have felt I was quiet. So
exactly.
So there is a large number of younger people who are casting their vote, despite being staunchly pro-union, for parties who do not designate as unionist. And we have to recognise that is because those parties fit their social agenda, and at this moment they do not see us as doing that. Excuse me. So I think that that generation urgently needs to be able to look at the UP and see a party which is modern and dynamic, and a movement that they feel they can be part of, and one whose unionism is blind to religion, to gender, to race, sexual orientation, class, and that means urgently us forcing the constitutional battle to become one of ideas and not of birthright. Because I think when we allow the constitutional argument to be narrowed down to that, unionism doesn't win. So I think at this moment in time there is a feeling that nationalism is on the front foot, but I think that the task is for political unionism as a whole to start representing the unionist population in this country with the confidence that they deserve to be represented with, rather than the fear that we've bred into them over the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Beginning by saying it is a very good book. I was here for the launch of the DUP book 4 or 5 years ago now, I think it was, when Arlene was heckling from the, not me for a change, but she was heckling, so feel free to heckle Mike if you want to heckle anybody. But I think it's good, it is good for a party to be challenged, particularly I think from where the Ulster Unionist Party was to where it is now. Now, rather than, most of you won't have read the book, so there's no point, I think, trying to dissect it, so I'm not going to. Just 3 or 4 points that came to my mind as I was reading it, which I think are worth bearing in mind once you've read it, and for all of you who are still in the party. There is a section in it about identity, how Ulster Unionists see themselves, and what they think is the difference between them and other Unionists. That is something that has dogged me. I first joined this party in 1970, and I came and went and so on. It was never a matter of who else I would join. It was always the Ulster Unionist Party. But when you ask people, what is it? What's the unique selling point of the Ulster Unionist Party? Even those of us who have been associated for decades and so on, still struggle to give you the answer. And Mike is right in one sense, as is the book. For the Ulster Unionist Party, it is and always has been country before party. But then take the DUP, where it's leader first, it's party second, it's electoral domination third, and it's sod the rest of you fourth. That's their reality. They're still taking 60% plus of the pro-union vote. So simply us saying on some sort of moral high ground, we are the party that puts country first, for some reason that is not resonating with a wider unionist family. And Lauren's right, there's a huge family out there, people like me who have no difficulty with the abortion law, no difficulty with same-sex marriage, no difficulty with changing licensing laws. But some of those people, including one of my closest friends, who stands with me in every single one of those issues, still finds himself voting DUP. And that's the big challenge for the Ulster Unionist Party, is that why in those circumstances people are sometimes voting against their own moral stances and their own political stances. And I remember another friend who's in the Democratic Unionist Party, who used to be in the Ulster Unionist Party, and I asked him, this maybe a couple of years ago, I was doing an interview, I asked him what the difference is, and he said, we do unionism better, we do the unionist brand better. That's exactly what he thought of the DUP. Not much of a defence, but that's his position. The other point, I think, is when we look at the Ulster Unionist Party from where it was when I first joined to where it is now, I sometimes wonder, and I've wondered this for a number of years, and maybe one of the problems is that a lot of people who used to vote Ulster Unionist and still maybe have a heart in the party, they gave up voting Ulster Unionist because they were tired of taking risks. They were tired of always being the party that had to make the first move and seeing very little reward for doing that. You go back to Terence O'Neill, and a lot of people, it's now become fashionable. I mean, Robin, has often made the point that Terence was one of the people that inspired him, politically. He took risks. Chichester Clark took risks. Brian Faulkner took risks. Harry West took risks at the time of the United Ulster Unionist Coalition. David obviously took risks. Reg took risks with the Yukon project. Even Mike, in the sense of vote Mike, vote Colin, working together in opposition. That was also seen as a risk by some members of the party. And each one of those risks has seen the party lose more votes. And it's almost this sense that people are going, why do we always have to take the risk? Why are we always the first party to move? Why are we constantly repositioning, reinventing, re-strategizing? Maybe we need to learn to just stand still. Because that's all the DUP does. The DUP looks at the Ulster Unionist Party, learns the mistakes, picks them off, and quite often does the same thing afterwards, but does it better because it gets the party organised. In terms of, I think the last chapter was about whether it's too early to write the obituary, whether it's survival and so on. Survival in any political party depends on one simple thing, and that is votes. You don't survive without votes. And in terms of the Ulster Unionist Party, you want to get votes. Only a number of places you can get them from people who are already voting for political parties. People are voting DUP, PUP, Conservative, TUV, Alliance, some of the fringe groups around the area, some independents. How do you get them back? How do you get the people? I think Bill White was here, he'd give you better figures. I think somewhere between 10 and 15% of people who used to vote Unionist Party and who are still alive aren't voting at all. Is there some way of tapping into them? How do you tap into the post-98 generation, people who now in this next 2 or 3 years are becoming voter age? How do you get all those people on board? And as well as reaching out to those 5, 6, 7, 8 bases, how do you keep your own existing base on board? Because there's no point getting 1,000 people from Alliance if you lose 2,000 people from your own side. So that again is, I think, one of the huge challenges. How do you tap into that to survive? Because there's no point saying, oh, we did the heavy lifting, we're in the moral high ground, we did this, we did. That doesn't matter if you're not getting votes as a consequence of that. I think the one big problem that the Ulster Unionist Party faces, in fact, the one big problem I think unionism fears, I think we are now down into a pure and simple numbers game. Nothing else will matter because it's the shifting demographics, it's the fact that the Unionists have lost the majority in the Assembly, it's just all of that in play, so when people are starting to think, even if they like the TUV, Ulster Unionist, whatever it is, there's going to be a tendency now to rally around the main party. Particularly with all this talk about border polls, Brexit, that border poll stuff was coming anyway. Don't buy into this thing. If everybody in Northern Ireland had voted Remain, the whole United Kingdom had voted Remain, the border poll unity stuff was going to go away. It wasn't going to go. It might have gone for 2 or 3 years down the line. It was simply coming back. And I think the other thing worth bearing in mind when we say, and this is the final point, when you look at what's happening with the SDLP and Fianna Fáil today, when you look at what's happening with Sinn Féin, obviously the All-Ireland thing, when you look at what's happening on Saturday in the Waterfront Hall, where you have civic nationalism all coming together with border poll is going to be an issue there, it's quite clear that what we're seeing, in a way I have not seen in my lifetime, is the two big blocks, there is no interest in meeting in the middle anymore. I mean, one thing the Fianna Fáil SDLP did, it killed off any chance of Robin repeating Mike's experiment with the SDLP. It did, yeah. Yeah.
And I think, so on that's basically the point. I think there is a huge challenge. This book is right. There are huge challenges for the Ulster Unionist Party, and my gut instinct, it's worth the challenge. But Lauren is at the key point, what Lauren said. How do you get all those people who sit and agree with the Ulster Unionist Party on so many issues? If you give, it's called the blind test. Give them a blind test of policies, views, aspirations and visions. The Ulster Unionist Party would probably beat the DUP and every other Unionist Party hands down. Put that onto the ballot box, and somehow you're on the losing side again. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really interesting points from all three speakers. The lights may have gone out on us, but we are still carrying on, and I'm going to open the floor to questions. We also have the co-authors, so we've got Tom, Jim, John and Moira somewhere. So feel free to field questions to them also. So if you have a question and you want to direct it at one of the speakers, please say that at the beginning. And I'll take 3 questions at a time. And if you could keep it quite short so we could get as many questions in as possible. Thank you. Shining light over. That would be really great. So yeah, can I take the first questions? I'll go David at the back. One more. And followed by you.
Sorry, I've gone into lecture mode. It's really loudly, just with the acoustics in this venue. It's really nice if we could.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have a roaming mic either, so yeah, speak up.
Speak up.
Yeah, Mike, and then Alex, just because you just touched on the Fianna Fáil SDLP thing. So obviously, you did the vote column, get Mike stick in the 2016 conference.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that pro-union voters saw that as a turn-off, and why do you think that was? And also, just the whole partnership between Colin and the SDLP, how do you think that will play with relations with the Ulster Unionists going forward if an assembly comes back?
Okay. And was there one at the back somewhere? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My question is for the whole panel, and very simply, is there not a pro-union case for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement and the backstop in particular? And if there is, what space is there for the UUP to make that case? And is there any political capital for the party in making that case?
Okay, thank you. And finally?
Michael Palmer, Commander MP. One of the things that I'll say is that in terms of, say, unionism, I mean, a lot of people say let's come together and merge and all that stuff, but my concern would be that if it does come together, where does unionism sort of go from the point of view in terms of, say, maybe, being inclusive, being open towards maybe gay people, being open towards different minority groups, etc. Because if unionism does come together, then I would say under the DUP, the union's probably going to be lost because they're alienating so many people from the, say, Catholic minority, they're alienating gay people from the party. And I was actually in the room, I remember a year ago, I think, a room of young people, and there were people from Muslim backgrounds. They're saying that they are considering voting for United Ireland if things don't actually change in unionism. So I think unionism does need radical change. I'd be interested in that.
Okay, thank you. So the first one from David. Did you read it that way?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say about the kind of vote might get column is that the vote went up. The seats didn't go up, but actually our first preference vote went up. And Alex, you suggested it went down, but it actually went up. So it wasn't without its appeal. And let me explain it, I suppose, in a way that maybe I didn't at the time. If there's a Westminster election, the electorate anticipate that one party will go into 10 Downing Street with the Prime Minister. Now, occasionally, like in 2010, the Liberal Democrats become a coalition partner. Occasionally, as in 2017, the person in number 10 needs a confidence and supply arrangement with another party. These are very imperfect, and we see the negative impact they have on the ability of the main party of government to govern. And it's not by choice, it's by what the electorate vote. Whereas in the Belfast Agreement, we said by choice, we will put 2 parties into our 10 Downing Street, the building called the Castle. And there'll be a Unionist party and there will be a Nationalist / Republican party. I don't understand, when you have a single transferable vote, why Unionists will only express an opinion on which Unionist party they want on the ground floor of Stormont Castle, when they can transfer and express an opinion on whether they want the SDLP or Sinn Féin on the first floor. So that was the fundamental logic behind it, and I don't think it was a turn-off but it wasn't a big enough turn on. And life is about timing. And I was proposing, a new centre ground alliance at a time when, in one word, the word crocodile, Arlene Foster energised nationalism in a way Gerry Adams has only ever dreamt of. And so as I was going, let's go post-sectarian, in comes this tsunami of sectarian voting, and away I went. What is the impact of what happened today? I don't know, but could I say, vote Robin and get me home? No. So whatever it is, it makes the challenge exponentially more difficult. Are we going through all three of them?
Did anyone else want to?
Okay, just say, Lauren, do you want to say something?
No.
I was just going to say on David's point that I think the whole idea, not simply behind the vote column get Mike, but that whole thing of providing an alternative to the Sinn Féin DUP axis to say, here are people, here are parties who can actually be civil with each other, can find common agreement. They're never going to find common agreement on the Constitution, but they can find common agreement on health, on education, on making Northern Ireland work, on infrastructure. Indeed, I think just shortly after Colin became leader, he'd say it's really important that before we get into the whole United Ireland thing, let's make sure Northern Ireland works first, because if it isn't working, we're not... So I can see where Mike was coming from, but he's absolutely right. You get to the point, when that set up, that was 2016, they went into opposition together, we always knew it was going to take 3, 4, 5 years. They didn't get that. You got, 6 months or something like that, if that, to actually...
Actually, if you take out summer recess, it's down to 4.
You have 4 months, and then suddenly your next big sell after those 4 months is, as Mike's, is an accurate one. Arlene killed that. I suspect. People always say it was a throwaway, accidental line. I've known Arlene 30 years. She doesn't do throwaway, accidental lines, and I think she knew exactly what it would do. It would galvanise in exactly the same way that she stupidly galvanised Nationalist vote at a time when they didn't need to be. She very deliberately, I think, galvanised Unionist votes to her side of the camp.
I think we move on to the second.
The second question was there anything for unionism in the withdrawal agreement and the backstop? I think that is a very good question. I was struck by the reaction of people like the business community, the farmers. I had a very long chat actually with Bill Woolsey around that time, and I see he was out again in the last couple of days expressing his frustration. But I'm afraid the answer to you tonight is, if there was, it has gone. And I was for Remain, which I think was the better position, but it has gone. So we are where we are, and we have to build on that.
I feel like this is a bit of a John Tong question. I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you want to know?
It's certainly not John Tong answer. I mean, yeah.
Do you want a microphone?
What's the view tonight for my answer on that? Because I was asked that question about policy differences, and it was a really good question. I completely agree with Mike on that. The problem with the Ulster Unionist Party was that it didn't take a majority of its members or a majority of its voters behind its remaining position. A majority actually voted leave in the Brexit referendum campaign. Notwithstanding, I think the Ulster Unionist Party, I'm not just saying this because of the audience tonight, I think they've asked the right questions about Brexit, and some of the answers are impossible to provide. But they were the first party to produce a document on the implications of the referendum result, which I did think was to their great credit.
Just very quickly on the backstop, and I'm not going to make it Remain or Leave, because I voted Leave and would vote Leave again if there was a second referendum. The backstop, I don't see how Unionists get agreement on the backstop, because however you paint or cut that particular cookie, you cannot, a backstop which actually says either for a non-time limited period or for a time limited period, Northern Ireland will be treated entirely differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. There is no way you can segue that to make Unionists happy. And I just don't see how it can be done. And to be honest, I don't really want to see it done.
Yeah, just that document came as a result, if you remember, after the referendum result, Arlene Foster and Martin McGuinness wrote to Theresa May. I think it was a 3-page letter, and they identified 5 issues. And I don't mean this unkindly, but there was an element of stating the bleeding obvious in those. And I said, well, look, guys, I was for Remain, but I'm a Democrat. We will have to leave. So the document we wrote was a vision for Northern Ireland outside of the EU, and the starting place was the border, everybody considering that there was a border that had to be policed. In other words, how do we keep the border closed when we need it closed? And my view was, let's look at it the other way. We are the only land border between the UK and the EU when Brexit happens. How do we monetise the border? How do we open it and use it as our gateway for the United Kingdom into Europe? And we went on to make 10 proposals in terms of investment in infrastructure and in training with all the money that was going to be repatriated. And then we put it to the Assembly and said, is this a framework? We didn't say you have to accept every word, you don't have to accept the 10 proposals, but is this the right framework for us to go forward? And we lost the vote. And 2.5 years after the referendum, Northern Ireland is still going to be the most impacted region of the UK by Brexit, and we're still the least prepared.
Okay, and then we had the final question about inclusivity within unionism, and are the DUP alienating minorities and how the DUP can react to that? Did anyone want to take that?
Yeah, we can do. I think one of the things that I will point to is that whenever Robin Swan took up the leadership in 2017, he established a number of working groups because we acknowledged that in terms of unionism in the Ulster Unionist Party, there was a lot of pockets of our society that we weren't reaching out to where we could. Probably the one that's received the most focus has been the LGBT working group, where there's been a lot of good work going on. But I think you're right, and I think at the moment, unfortunately, unionism as a whole looks snide and obnoxious rather than open and inclusive and reflective of 21st century Britain or the UK. So I think there is a lot of work to be done. The problems that unionism face, probably the problems that Northern Ireland faces as a whole, in that we are a very sort of white male middle class society for a certain part, and there is a lot of political parties here who have that to overcome. But I think that the unionism, sooner rather than later, has to wake up to the risks that come with not moving to shape ourselves to reflect the people that we expect to vote for us.
I'll take 3 more questions. So there's one in the maroon jumper, a guy at the back, and there's one to my left as well. So if you want to go in that order? Yeah. I'll come back.
Well, I should get the point here. I'm a member actually of the Irish Party, as Alec knows. But there seems to be this situation where both unionist parties, particularly even the Ulster Unionists, and we've seen this for the 0.1% that are Catholic, it seems to be frauds, effectively frauds only. There doesn't seem to be any reaching out at all, no matter what people say to the Catholic community. I'm afraid, now you might not disagree with this, but I mean, even when and since I was young, even since 85, the Ulster Unionists, when Monaghan was there, they always seemed to play second fiddle. They always call them Dr. Patey and all this. I'm afraid, I think in the past, the Ulster Unionists have been a spineless Scottish party, and I just feel that, I mean, you seem to dislike alliance very much, and yet if there ever was a border closing for alliance and great support to get presumably to get a border, but don't show that. It seems to be sort of project, and you don't understand her. I mean, my wife is from a Catholic background, which is a
So can I ask you to get to the question? Sorry.
To my mind, you seem to just think, you seem to be that you can get through in prose only, and there's no understanding of how moderate Catholics look at things.
Okay, so appeal to moderate Catholics. Okay, thank you. There was one at the back.
Hi. So the war, or whatever you want to call it, ended like 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now. Why do you think that society here, there's still such, what do you want to call hatred or fear or just mystification between the two communities? I mean, a big reason why people feel like they have to vote for the DUP or Sinn Féin is because they have such a palpable fear of the other guy winning. Why do you think that taking that step of bringing the Assembly into the party agreement and ensuring the Northern Ireland constitutional status is settled hasn't done more to alleviate some of that fear and maybe move the electorate on towards being more interested in policy and less interested in likelihood versus free white?
Okay, thank you. And the final one was over here.
Considering the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain, do you
there might be an electoral dividend for the UUP based on the fact that the DUP have totally misrepresented the people of Northern Ireland on the Brexit issue?
Okay, thank you. So the first question was about appealing to modern Catholics.
Yeah, I'll take that if I may. I just do not recognise your comments and your criticisms in terms of outreach. And you know, if we want to talk about the number of Requiem masses I went to, including Martin McGuinness's, if we want to talk about the number of GAA matches I went to, I'm not sure these things are that important. But do you think I thought the SDLP was populated by prods? That was outreach. That was outreach. Let's work together. As Alex said, Colin, when he got the leadership, I heard him say this. He said, I want to make Northern Ireland work. And it was a phrase I had been using. And when I went and sat down with him, guess what? We were defining it the same way. Quality of the health service, the education system, and the prosperity of our people, and not just how much they had in their back pockets, which is important, but also their well-being, because in terms of mental health and poor well-being, our per capita rates are amongst the worst in the world. And so we determined that it didn't matter that his motivation was to make us more attractive to Dublin, whereas mine was to stick with London. We realised it's a generation's work to make all those boats rise. And then it's for our children, or our grandchildren, or our great-grandchildren to make the call on the constitutional question. And by the way, just refer back to the border poll. I'm sure one is coming at some point, Alex. But if you and I went down to Dublin tomorrow morning and said, New Year's resolution, let's have a border poll in 2019, we'll get an armed escort to the border and we'll be invited never to come back. They are thinking 10, 15 plus years for a border poll.
John, did you want to say anything about the statistics on?
Well, the stats, I suppose, are in comparison to the party. They're there in the book. 0.2% Catholic membership of the Ulster Unionist Party, which is actually lower in percentage terms than the DUP. It's slightly surprised, I think, because all of us, I think, don't speak on behalf of all the co-authors. So, you know, Mike's right, yeah, we reached out to the SDLP, which is populated by Catholics, but in terms of party membership, more needs to be done. I should say that the vast bulk, we asked also the Ulster Unionist Party to do more to attract Catholics, and the vast bulk of members said yes, we should be doing more as a party to attract Catholics. I suppose the question is how do you construct that outreach program?
So the second question was about moving on from the conflict and thinking about the other, and having a lot more kind of interest in policy when it comes to politics and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, Michael, I think you're hitting on this old idea of, for the nationalists, every agreement is part of a process that continues, and for unionism we're always looking for settlement. So, you know, 1921, partition, settlement, that's it, forever and a day. For nationalists, no, we're going to work. Belfast Agreement, they said explicitly, this is a staging post in a process, whereas unionism effectively was saying, well, that's it, settled. And it's just a matter of huge regret for me that we haven't been able to get two parties going into the castle to lead the executive government who were able to say, we're going to park that constitutional piece and concentrate on the other issues. Although, in fairness, the constitutional question in terms of a border poll was put off the agenda by the Belfast Agreement, and it stayed off until the 24th of June 2016, when the referendum on Brexit, when that result was announced. If you think about the relationships between the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister over the last 21 years, there's probably only 1 year where it's been as intended in terms of presentations, and that was the Chuckle Brothers. And if you ask people, and I think they are quite nostalgic for those days, if you ask them what did they do for health or education, nobody knows, but they don't care. The point was, these two people came together, sat together, put a smile on their face, and made you believe they were going to try.
Can I just very quickly, just on that original question about reaching out to Catholics. I've never cared about reaching out to Catholics or reaching out to gay people or reaching out to women or reaching out to coloured people or reaching out to anyone. My view of the union is that no matter which unionist party you're in, if you're a unionist, you set out of the values that are encapsulated in the entire United Kingdom. This is a form of unionism in Northern Ireland is not different. It's not a place apart. So it isn't about specifically reaching out to Catholics. It's simply saying this is what the union is. This is what unionism is. This is what equality of citizenship is. If you believe in all of that, we don't give a stuff what your background is. You are in fact a unionist. You don't have to join a unionist party. You may never vote for a unionist party at local council election. You may never vote for it in an assembly. But if it ever came to a border poll, if it ever came to a situation where you had to make a constitutional decision, you would have no difficulty making that decision for the Union and the United Kingdom. So that's what reaching out should be about. In terms of the I think it was Michael's question about the why we're still sort of polarised. I mean, we're not talking about conflict resolution here. We're talking about conflict stalemate. It's still more or less as it was. One of my rare moments in my life of optimism, because I don't do optimism well, never have, but one of my rare moments was back in 1998 when I thought for the first moment in my life there was an opportunity which needed to be tested. We needed to test it to the point of destruction to see if it was maybe just possible that the political parties in Northern Ireland and the people in Northern Ireland could reach a situation where, without abandoning their constitutional views, they could actually make this place work together and share together. And there would be risks involved and difficulties involved. It took me maybe 2 years to realise that wasn't going to happen. And the sad thing is, and maybe it's because there is no common ground on where Northern Ireland. It's very difficult to govern a country when at the heart of the government you don't have agreement on where the country should be in 5 or 10 years' time. It's very difficult to govern a country when you have people who are there simply because, well, we're entitled to be here. It's not that they want necessarily to be sharing power. They just think, well, we've got the seat, so we're in here. Not necessarily to share power. Mike knows, I mean, not anyone who was involved. Danny will know, I mean, this wasn't an issue of a collective executive working together in common cause. Most of the time it was about fighting each other. So don't be surprised that 20 years down the line, I look, my daughter, Megan was born in October 1998. And I remember saying jokingly to Gareth Gordon once, well, do you know something, Gareth? If nothing else, if nothing else in my life, if all I've done is make one little contribution to that agreement, just going back 20 years, one little contribution, so that when she gets her first vote, she can actually have choices I never had. She can have freedoms that I never had in terms of politics in Northern Ireland. Her first vote was the 2017 Assembly election for an Assembly which hasn't met. Her second vote was for the general election in 2017, which produced one of the most polarised, divisive results in my lifetime. And people say about young people, today, that generation we're talking about, about reaching out to them. There's nothing for them. No political party is able to give them anything, because at the heart, and do you know the most worrying thing of all of this? Whatever the political parties are saying to each other, deep down, and I know this is a very pessimistic point of view, but deep down, I can't help think, looking at how the DUP have polarised and expanded, no matter how hard they get, and the same with Sinn Féin, no matter how hard they get, I can't help thinking, since they now account for 66% of the vote between them, I can't help but think and conclude that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland have actually given up on power sharing in the original sense in which it was first introduced in 1974 and in which it was reinvented again in 1998. I think that moment has gone.
We have also a final question, which was about the Remain vote, and I think it was around the fact that the majority of Northern Ireland voted to remain. Should the DUP capitalise on that? I think that was... Sorry?
Is there an election visited for the UP based on the fact that we have been misrepresented in Westminster by the DUP on the issue?
Well, we signed up for a UK-wide vote, a simple vote in or out, and we campaigned for Remain. And it was nuanced in that what the party executive, who was the ruling body, said was, I'm not sure if I'm verbatim here, but we said, on balance, Northern Ireland, rather than the UK, on balance, Northern Ireland is better off staying in, arguing for further reform of the European Union. And then we left it to individual members to vote as they saw fit, and as John says, it appears a majority actually voted to leave. So we had no choice when the result was announced, even though 56% in Northern Ireland said Remain. The only figures that we said we would recognise were the results of the UK-wide vote, and it was 52% Leave, and that's when we switched and we produced our document, and we have been trying to bring some clarity ever since. I have to say, one of the reasons that I said I am recommending the party adopts a Remain position is that there is no plan. And there's 100 people in our executive, and we met at the Hilton in Temple Patrick, and I said, I am for remaining, but I'm now going to listen. And if somebody can persuade me for Brexit by telling me what it means and the implications for Northern Ireland if we vote for Brexit, I'm listening. And nobody could. And 2.5 years on, and 70 odd days away from the deadline, nobody has managed it yet. You know, Theresa May came out with that famous Brexit means Brexit. That's as meaningful as me saying, I'm going to buy you lunch. You don't know if we're going to Dean's or around the corner for a ham and egg sandwich from the petrol station. They're both lunch. The day of the referendum result, it turned out the Consul General had the 4th of July party up at the American consulate's residence. And I was up with a lot of politicians, and 2 young men said, could we speak to you? Their story was they were 30-something years of age, and they were business people. And they said, look, we're nationalists by background. And if you asked us, would we aspire to see a united Ireland someday, we would say yes. If you asked us to be activists to try and make it happen, we would chase you. Because we're too busy earning good money, having our children well educated, and basically just enjoying life, to be really bothered that this part of the island of Ireland is under British rule. We're actually content with that. And one of the reasons they were content was that the Belfast Agreement said, you and only you define who you are. So if you want to say you're British, fill your boots. You want to say you're Irish, fill your boots. If you want to be a combination, work away. And there's no hierarchy. Being British is not a better identity than Irish. And what they felt was that in the result, this is what they felt, it may not be true, that little Englanders, English nationalists, came in over their heads and did exactly what the agreement said couldn't happen. They altered their sense of identity, because being European as well as Irish was very important to them, because it gave them their link to people on the other side of the border. And if you remember, the famous Ulster poet John Hewitt refused to have a binary identity. He said, I'm an Ulsterman, but I'm also British, Irish and European. And importantly, he went on with this warning: deny any part of my identity and you diminish who I am. And that is what has happened, largely in the nationalist community. But there are also unionists, or people who now describe themselves as, I am from a unionist background. And they're now thinking the unthinkable, such as the impact of Brexit. So there is perhaps an opportunity for unionism, but it begins with recognising the changing environment that has been created, not least by Brexit.
Yeah, I think Mike is largely correct there. I think he referred earlier to that letter that McGuinness and Foster had written in August 2016, a couple of months after the result, when they said they would work together, and the Prime Minister had agreed that the Executive would be represented through the First and Deputy First Minister, and that there would be constant liaison between Brussels, Dublin, Belfast, and so that was good, because there always was the possibility of a bespoke arrangement for Northern Ireland, which recognised the Good Friday Agreement, which recognised all the other very specific differences in Northern Ireland, not least the fact that we're the only part of the UK with a land border. The problem is that in 2017, when the DUP suddenly found themselves kingmakers at Westminster, what you do in a case like that, if you're canny, particularly if you're a unionist in those circumstances, and not representing the majority of people in Northern Ireland, you say to the Prime Minister, look, we're not changing one word of our belief from that letter a year ago. it's important, if we have a voice in this cabinet, if we have a voice in this government, it's actually a voice that needs to be extended. So we talk to the other 4 parties in Northern Ireland, we talk to the Dublin government, we talk to Barney, we go collectively. But Arlene didn't. Not just maybe her specifically, but the DUP decided at that moment, for reasons I've never entirely understood, to play some sort of uber unionist card, that we are the masters now, we're bigger than everyone else in Northern Ireland, we're more important than everyone else in Northern Ireland, and we will play all the cards our way. And if the backstop problem, I have to say, and I'm not going to blame her entirely for this, but the backstop problem never needed to be a problem because it never needed to be there. But I think the DUP so massively overplayed their hand in that period that they gave the government almost nowhere else to go. And they need to remember that 2/3 of the Tories voted and have continued to vote for that backstop. And that is the DUP's problem. And had they talked about it, and I know I know that Varadkar, hasn't the political experience to realise that he has been played as a pawn by both sides in all of this. But there was a moment 3 or 4 months after June 2017 when all these warring parties in political terms could have talked easily and comfortably and come to a bespoke arrangement. The DUP killed that stone dead. And I say that as someone with no hesitation voting for Leave, as I would do so again, but they turned what was a difficult problem but a surmountable problem into a huge mess it never needed to be.
We've got time at least for one more round of questions. I'll see how we go after that. But I've got a mental list in my brain. So there was a gentleman here. You had a question, didn't you? Yeah, a question there. And then I know there's 2 at the back. So it was you at the scarf and you in the grey. And then after that, 1, 2. So we've got 5. Yeah, so if we could rattle through these, that would be really great.
You can dig forward.
This may have been touched upon, but perhaps the panel could comment further. In the conclusion to the book, there's a comment that the UUP searches for a sustained, coherent strategy to prize support from the DUP. Could I ask you to comment on the fact that if that is the core central plank of your strategy, to prize support from the DUP, is that not somewhat narrow? And the fact the strategy needs to have a wider appeal? Because if the DUP do what they do, frankly they do it better. And just would like your comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Just like that, yeah.
Are we moving towards a redefinition of our identities? What I mean is it going to be British nationalism against European unionism?
Okay, thank you. And gentleman in the grey?
I was wondering if one of the authors of the book could actually give us some idea of what the book's actually about.
Just get back there.
I haven't read the book, and it's like this is lessons therefore, but what I've read of it, it seems to suggest that the Ulster Unionist Party has a glass that's half full, if you like, but it's leaking seriously. Would that be correct?
Okay. There was these 2, and then
Thank you. Alex mentioned in his comments the fact that unionism is fallen below 50% of the overall vote. The Assembly is now minority unionist. A reinvigorated nationalism. We've had scandal upon scandal, RHI being the latest one. Yet, as he rightly says, the unionist paradigm is that the DUP are the successful and hardline unionists. So the facts don't underpin that. So there's a dichotomy somewhere. How do the Ulster Unionist Party get those facts across to change that paradigm?
okay, thank you. And I think I had one more. Was it? Yeah.
So just to ask a question, you touched on St Andrews, because I described the curse of St Andrews, i.e. the First Minister comes from the largest party. Does that mean now that in Northern Ireland, particularly the Assembly, that policies don't matter? It's just who's in the village. And therefore, is the Ulster Unionist Party doomed in that?
We're all doomed.
Okay, right, so if we take them roughly in order. So the first one was about where do you go beyond a sustained coherent strategy that means taking support from the DUP, and what wider appeal can the party take?
Well, Terry, I think you know that wasn't my sustained strategy, was to win votes off the DUP or back off the DUP. I do accept that the majority of people who vote in recent years have voted either DUP if they're pro-union or Sinn Féin if they're pro-nationalist. But I was more focused on the very large section of the population who don't vote. And, you know, some of them would be unionists, some of them would be perhaps soft unionists in the way those two businessmen I met on the 24th of June in 16 were kind of soft nationalists. And I was for broadening our appeal as much as possible and showing a willingness to work with the other partner who I hope we would join in Stormont Castle to lead the executive. And I think, you know, that's what I think a lot of people wanted to see, but it came probably just too quickly. I mean, we came out of the executive just before the 2016 Assembly election. Then the SDLP joined us after the 2016 election, and we had plans for that 5-year mandate. And we started with asking our relative spokespeople to work together, and Philip Smith was our finance spokesman, and he was in touch with Claire Hanna, his counterpart in the SDLP, almost daily. Some of the other spokespeople hadn't quite got to that point of, you know, having a good, trusted relationship. But the idea was over the 5 years we'd form a shadow executive, and if we didn't have a shadow programme for government, because that might have been a bit of a stretch on resources, we would certainly have had a proposed shadow legislative programme. But when Danny walked away from the table and Mark H. Durkin walked away from the table, and the only people around that executive table were the DUP and Sinn Féin with Claire Sugden sitting there, so they were just eyeballing each other. They had no cover, they had nobody to blame, they had no department to take money off, and it fell apart immediately because they hate each other. And that is the bottom line, and there's no attempt to build the relationships. And if you go back to the very first page of the Belfast Agreement 21 years ago, is it talking about Stormont? No. North-South? No. East-West? No. What it says is a declaration of support where everybody involved said we're going to use this as a fresh opportunity. It's actually a fresh start. That's where that expression came from, by the way. A fresh start in building new relationships based on tolerance, based on reconciliation, based on mutual trust and mutual respect. And that's what is missing, and that's where I think the opportunity is for the Ulster Unionist Party, and that would require a strategy which is absolutely not about a sustained attack on DUP voters. And Mark's point, if I can flip straight to the last one, you suggested policies don't matter. How right you are. Because in 2016 did we do 7?
Yeah.
7 policy documents. We did mental health, we did the armed forces, we did animal welfare, we did cancer care, all of these before the manifesto. And everybody said these are great policies. Did they win us a single vote? I doubt it very much.
Lauren, did you want to comment?
I'll maybe touch back on Terry's point on going after DUP voters. I mean, the fact remains that, that whether we like it or not, there are people who are voting DUP who should not be voting DUP, who are not hardcore DUP voters who believe in the ethos of the DUP. And it would be an absolute, it would be foolish of us not to go after those people. I mean, as Alex says, there are people there who, on every aspect of their life, should be in total opposition to the DUP. Now that we can't go that narrow, and we of course have to look at other opportunities for winning votes. But I don't accept the premise that to go after people who vote for DUP means to lurch out to the right. It means working out that ingredient that is making them vote for the DUP at the moment rather than the Ulster Unionist Party.
That's absolutely right, Terry, what Lauren's saying there, that it's worth bearing in mind. Right at the beginning I said, the only way the Ulster Unionist Party gets votes back, it's find out where they've gone, and I think 2/3 of the people who used to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party in the past 25 years, even before the Good Friday Agreement, shifted to the DUP for a variety of reasons. If the party is going to survive, it needs to reach out to them, but equally it needs to find out why people who used to vote the Ulster Unionist Party, instead of going to the DUP, have gone to Alliance. Because that to me, that's another conundrum. But basically, you only do that by you need to understand, Terry, why people who once voted for you don't vote for you anymore. On Mark's point about policies mattering, even before, honestly, this is, and Mark will know, he and I have had this conversation many times, I'm not sure that policies mattered all that much prior to the change at St Andrews, because in that period from 98 to 2003, it was quite clear Trimble was shafted by the Prime Minister. They realised that they did the votes on the Assembly Day, and the first day of the count, I remember talking to David Trimble about this a few days afterwards, they did the mathematics and they realised that David hadn't got a majority of unionists, in the Assembly behind the Good Friday Agreement. Even in an Assembly team, there were 2 or 3 there who were at best lukewarm. And at that point, it became a case of how long do you keep this going until they managed to get rid of the Ulster Unionist Party and bring the DUP in. And the minute the DUP said, because it's always worth bearing in mind, the DUP who ran the whole campaign of this is a one-way ticket to United Ireland, that sharing power with Sinn Féin would be unspeakably evil, an unspeakable act of betrayal. As soon as the DUP got in, they added the figures up as well. If they had walked at that point, the DUP had walked, they would have taken Bob McCartney's 5 with them, they would have taken the 3 independents with them, and I would put any money you like, they would have taken at least 2 Ulster Unionist MLAs with them. The Assembly would have collapsed at that point. It survived simply because the DUP decided they were going to stay. And at that moment, Mark, that's when all this stuff about policies went out the window, because the British and Irish government and Americans thought, OK, our aim now is not to make the SDLP and UUP an alliance stable. Our aim now is to take the fringes, so-called fringes of Sinn Féin and DUP and make them the middle ground, make them the centre ground. And it's a bloody perverse parallel universe when suddenly the DUP and Sinn Féin are the centre ground of any political world. Philip's point about this paradigm about, what you do with unions, all these things about the DUP, and most other governments, at least 2 or 3 senior DUP figures would have gone by now. There would have been 4 moral grounds would have forced them out. The other thing, and it plays into what you were saying earlier, Philip, about how you get people, unionists, to vote, come back from the DUP and vote for the Ulster Unionist Party. There's something more crucial at play here, and that is, and it's worth bearing in mind, in the last 5 elections in Northern Ireland, and that includes a Euro one and a council election and 2 assembly elections, unionists, and I'm defining unionists simply as those who say in their manifesto, we are pro-union, we are unionist. They just about, in 2 cases they didn't get a majority. So you've had, in the last 5 elections, unionists have, to all intents and purposes, have not represented a majority of those who are voting. That's what Ireland's playing on. That's what the DUP's playing on. That every vote not given to the DUP, that a vote for the UUP is a waste, a vote for the PUP is a waste, a vote for the TUV is a waste. Every one of those is a waste. And I really don't know. As someone who deep down still cares about the Ulster Unionist Party, I have many friends in it from going back 30, 40 years. I really don't know how you take that challenge and get round it, because they will continue to play this card over and over and over again. It's what I said earlier. This is the numbers game, that if you vote for anyone but us, you are jeopardising the union, because our enemies are counting the figures as well. Our enemies are going to the Secretary of State to say, oh, you say, what are the conditions? What's likely? Is it likely a border poll could produce this? It's likely because unionists don't have a majority. That's what it's become now, Philip. Nothing else. Policies, nothing else matters.
Yeah, and on the other side, Sinn Féin are now basically saying on the doorstep, if you vote for the SDLP,
absolutely,
it's an unpatriotic action, because yours could be the very vote that tips us into the First Minister's office and down the stairs from the first floor to the ground floor of Castle Buildings. In terms of changing the paradigm, Philip, you're reminding me of, there's a guy, a business guru called Charles Handy, and he used to tell the wonderful story about this particular type of frog. And the characteristic was, if you put the frog into a pan of cold water and slowly, like really slowly, heat the water up to boiling point, the frog perishes, because it doesn't understand that the environment around it is changing. And my fear for unionism, not for the party, but for unionism, is that we become that frog, because the environment is changing around us. The demographics are changing. Now, that doesn't mean a united Ireland is inevitable, but the demographics are changing, and are we aware of that? You've got Scottish nationalism. Are we sufficiently aware of the dangers of that? There's English nationalism. Are we sufficiently aware? There is, dare I say, as a danger to the Union, the DUP. I know many people who would say, growing up, the biggest obstacle to United Ireland was the IRA, because we would not allow them to force us into change. But now the organisation we feel that is doing most through their policies and their attitude and their language and their tone to put it on the agenda is the DUP. Are we aware of that? And Brexit, as I've previously discussed, particularly for people of the nationalist community. But there is a new unionist demographic, I don't know how big it is, but it's not insignificant, that is growing up and asking questions that people never asked before and thinking thoughts that were never thought before. So yes, we need a new paradigm which analyses and reacts to all those threats to the union.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that entirely, Mike. Just one thing I think is worth saying, and I think it applies to the DUP and to elements of the UUP as well. We don't always understand that there's a difference between unionist and pro-union. And there is those business people, those people, as Mike said, are considering, they're saying, well, the multiplicity of identities that you have, in Northern Ireland, British, Ulster, Irish, wee county, province, whatever you want to, they're all at play there. There's some of those people who have never voted unionist, never would vote unionist, but will vote to remain in the United Kingdom. And I think the DUP particularly is not aware that it's that demographic. It's maybe between 12 and 15% are biddable now. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even Sinn Féin would have told you privately they were getting nowhere close to tapping into that demographic, those people. It's there. When you hear business people, when you hear people like Bill Wilson, when you hear the collective business in Northern Ireland, complaining about saying the threats on Brexit, doesn't necessarily mean those people are anti-unionist or anti-union. It meant for that period when they needed to talk to people in government, when they needed to talk to departmental ministers, there was no one else to talk to. That's partly where their fear comes from as well, that there's no one listening to them, because there's no matter what unionists say, no matter what the DUP say about, this happened or that happened, these people are used to talking to government. They're used to talking to ministers. They're pro-union. And I'll tell you this, Mike is right. I think the DUP do represent, unintentionally I suspect, a threat to the union. But the other biggest threat to the union is that 12 to 15% who are pro-union, who are being totally ignored by unionism, but not totally ignored by those who want a united Ireland.
Before we hear what the book is about, can I just say...
You haven't read it, have you?
Yeah. You get some bloody curious looks coming in on the glider holding one of these.
And if you want to be holding one of those, I've just noticed we've got 4 books left, so make sure you rush up at the end.
I just want to say that we are really grateful for Noel by supporting our launch this evening. And we have
No endeavouring.
So you've heard of it, we will meet the price that we're offering this evening, because even if you go on to OUP or Amazon or other suppliers, you're not going to beat Noel Buy's price. So we're really so fortunate that David can do that tonight. So there's 4 copies left, and don't knock us down. But that's, yeah.
Did anyone of my lovely co-authors want to touch on what the book's about in about a minute?
It's only got about a minute.
Go on.
Much time is it got? Sorry? No, I just think it's it reveals, I mean, some of the things about how attitudes... Sorry, microphone.
Johnny, just come up here.
Yeah, I'll come. No, I think it just gives an insight into the nature of the Ulster Unionist Party, how it's perhaps changed. And I think one of the interesting things is how what we're talking about is the trauma. I mean, there's been comments about what can the, why is the DUP been able to attract voters who would naturally be attracted to the Ulster Unionist Party. And I think one of the things that came through when we were interviewing people is that there was a moment when the DUP quite cleverly had a personal letter that was put out to voters, and the illusion that if you didn't vote for the DUP, you'd let that Martin McGuinness actually becoming First Minister would actually change things rather than the two things were co-equal was a factor in that. I think there is this idea, and I know Alex is very, very much about the idea of that there should be one unionist party. I think what the book also shows is, if you're trying to understand what is the Ulster Unionist Party, why people still join the Ulster Unionist Party, there is, and whether you agree whether it is effectively a Protestant party, that most of its membership is from one particular community, and there are hardly any, there's a negligible amount of Catholics and so on. I think what the book also shows is that how a party perceives itself is absolutely crucial, and it does perceive itself as a more pluralist party. I mean, one of the really interesting things that came out was on social issues such as abortion, that it favours over more than 50% of its membership favours having abortion the same lines that you have in Great Britain. So it perceives itself as a non-sectarian party, whatever one thinks de facto, looking at from externally, but it perceives itself as a non-sectarian party, and it perceives the DUP as a sectarian party. And there's that legacy about that what the DUP represents and has represented historically is something that a form of unionism that prevents other people wanting to vote for the DUP, and indeed also they want to be part of the Ulster Unionist Party. So.
Excellent. I think that just leaves me to thank our guests, Mike, Lauren and Alex. Thank you so much for joining us. Leaves me for saying thank you all so much for coming. Really hope you enjoyed the book, and we can continue the conversation. We've got #UUPbook, so feel free to ask any questions you didn't get a chance to ask. So thank you so much.